oral history interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
Geoffrey Gorman, I live in Mashpee, Massachusetts.
Okay. So now we are going to start the interview with a couple of questions about your childhood.
Ooh.
When you were growing up, who was your childhood hero?
Oh, geez, that's hard. I definitely I liked Abraham Lincoln. I'm from Illinois. I grew up in Illinois, and so Illinois is the land of Lincoln, and I thought he was a spectacular president. And I think I did a report on him in 5th grade. I thought he was the best president, so far. So.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any family members who were in the military?
My grandfather was in World War II, actually in the Army and the Navy, surprisingly enough. One of my favorite possessions, I have a really cool picture of him at boot camp when he graduated from his Navy boot camp.
What would you describe yourself like as you were growing up?
Pretty much the way I am now, laid back. We lived in a very rural community, so the town I grew up in only had 1,000 people in it, and there was 30-some people in my graduating class, so we were all very close and knew everything about each other. So I'm very open and overtly social, which is a Midwestern trait, which is not really a trait in New England as much as it is there. I did sports. I did everything because it's such a small school, so I did sports, did debate, did civics, art, played in band, pretty much everything.
What was your biggest fear when you were younger?
Biggest fear? I think really not being able to get out of my town when I graduated. Like I said, it was a very small town, and if you either stayed in the town and you took on a family business, or you farmed, or you found another way to get yourself excuse me, out of the town. I don't know if it was a fear, but it was definitely something I thought about, especially as I got into high school.
Okay, so now we're going to start asking some questions about your military service.
Sure.
What inspired you to join the military?
Originally it was, I think, a little selfish. Like I said before, I wanted to figure out a way to get out of my town, my rural town in Illinois. And one of the ways to do that was to join the military. And I also wanted to go to college, and my family could not afford to send me to college. So I knew I could go to the military, get the GI Bill, do 4 years, and then go get 4 years of college paid for by the government. That was my plan. As I got into the Navy more and I did my first 4 years, I realized that I liked serving, and I liked the honor of serving, and I liked meet new people and do new things. And like I said, being in such a small community, seeing the ocean for the first time and seeing a bunch of very diverse people that I wasn't used to was a big thing for me. So 4 years turned into 27. Yeah.
What was the most difficult part of being in the military?
Being away from family. Mm-hmm. So I joined the Navy 2 weeks out of high school, so I was 18, and I jumped on a bus and went to Des Moines, and I've never lived anywhere near my family since then.
What was the happiest moment?
I think I started off as an enlisted sailor, and I think when I was selected for commission, when I was able to become an officer, I think that was probably the pinnacle of my career.
Did your service have an effect on how you viewed the world?
Oh, I think so. I mean, it's hard to compare because it's all I know. I think that I have a much more like a worldly view of things. I think just because I've worked with so many different countries, and I've worked with people from the richest, whitest neighborhoods to the poorest, diverse neighborhoods that you can think of, and we all were together side by side, shoulder to shoulder, having to do the same job. So I think that was nice to work with that kind of diversity. Good worldview. I think it also made me a little bit more concerned about details than I used to be. I was much more laid back than I was before I joined the military, so I'm much more attention to detail oriented and situational awareness. And sometimes that's a double-edged sword. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad.
Mm-hmm. Did you? Okay, sorry. Do you cherish peace and calmness now more?
I don't know. I mean, I've always found ways to find a quiet, like calming place, or if you took time off to go into the woods or go fishing or something like that. I think I still enjoy the normal. I mean, I'm so used to the high speed, fairly stressful situations that it's been slowly hard for me to get away from that. And even my current job, I seem to always ask for more. Give me more responsibility, because I think that's what I'm used to, and I'm trying actually to deviate from that and find my zen. I haven't found my zen yet. I'm looking for it.
When you were at war, when did it sink in that you were actually at war?
I can tell you exactly when. So when I first went to Iraq, they house everybody, depending on where you're at, in these like trailers. They're broken up. And before you're able to get one of these trailers on the camp, you stay in a tent, and it was way in the middle of nowhere, and we were in this tent. It was a bunch of people, and everybody was sitting there. I remember the very first night that I was there, and I was actually writing a letter to Raina, and all the guys around me were cleaning their weapons, and I could hear in the background mortar fire and like 50 caliber machine gun fire, and I was like, okay, I'm not in Cape Cod anymore, or not in Kansas anymore. That's when it actually sunk in for the first time.
How were you treated as a soldier?
It's an interesting thing, because I was definitely treated differently as a Navy guy when I was, like in the Persian Gulf on a ship. When I was actually boots on the ground in the sand, attached to the 1st Infantry Division with the Army, I was treated very, very well. The one thing that the Army does is they treat their folks very, very well. The Navy does in their own way, but I think the people get lost in the shuffle, because there's, on an aircraft carrier, for example, there's 5,000 people, and there's going to be people lost in the shuffle. In an Army unit, a platoon is, maybe you have 20 or 30 guys. The platoon commander, he knows each one of those guys and their wives and their kids, and it's very, very close-knit, because they're out there relying on each other to save each other's behinds. So I like that family-oriented kind of thing. I was treated very well. I think there's a long answer to a short question.
It's fine. What branch of military were you in?
So I was in the Navy the whole time, but when I was stationed in Iraq, I was attached to the Army.
Okay. Did you ever regret joining the military?
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I got a lot of really good things out of it. I think ultimately I regretted being away from family as much as I was, and not having to be able to just jump in a car and drive and see somebody, or always be able to pick up the phone. It's much, as time went on, from when I first came in the military to when I retired. When I retired, you could go onto the ship and you could pick up a payphone and use a card to call home, and you couldn't be able to do that. As a matter of fact, good story, my first ship as an officer didn't have email, and what they would do is they would use the satellite phone, and they would download all the email, and they would print out on little sheets of paper and fold it up and staple it and give it to you, so you got all your emails like that. So that's how we got emails when that first started. Before that, everyone would wait till we pulled into port, because the most amazing thing when you pull into port is you get all your mail. So everybody would sit there, and they couldn't wait to pull into port, because they would do mail call, and everybody would run up and grab all their mail, and that's how you got your communication back and forth. And some of the old timers, because sometimes mail was out of order, something would get lost somewhere, or would go ahead or something like that to a different port, all the old timers, their wives or husbands would always number their letters. So if you got 2 last time, you knew the next one was 3. So if you got 4, don't open it, right? Wait till you get 3. So.
Where were you first drafted at?
So I wasn't drafted. I enlisted. I actually enlisted early. I enlisted while I was still a senior in high school, into what's called the delayed entry program. I don't know why I did that. I think I got caught up in the whole thing, and I'm like, oh, let's just do it. And every weekend I had to go to this, in Davenport, Iowa, I had to go and and do weekly training with those guys. But I actually entered the military in Des Moines, Iowa, and I went to boot camp in Orlando, Florida.
Okay. Would you change anything you did?
I might go back and maybe do a different job, or I didn't spend a lot of time determining what branch of the military to go into. I was actually going to talk to a Marine recruiter when I went to the recruiting station the first time, and the Marine recruiter wasn't there. And I was getting ready to go out, and the Navy recruiter, who was it was a building that had all the branches of the military in one big building. The Navy recruiter was like, "Well, if he's not here, I'll take care of you. Right, I'll talk to you." And I went and talked to him. And from that moment on, I didn't talk to the Army recruit. I didn't talk to the Coast Guard, Air Force, any of that stuff. So I think if I did it again, I think I would probably look into each branch the same amount and actually make a better decision. And then after that, I'd pick the right job. I think it was an arrogant way that I did it in the first, when I went in the Navy, is I kind of picked the hardest, most demanding, like academic job, as opposed to picking the one I thought I liked the best. But it turned out all right.
Mm-hmm. What was the worst thing you ever saw?
Well, luckily I never saw anyone get killed, which I know a lot of people in my unit in Iraq did. I think the worst thing I saw was in Iraq. We were driving to the Iraqi National Police Barracks, and a IED had just went off, probably a couple hours prior to, and there was just this huge hole in the road in the wall, and there was a building that was collapsed, and you see all the people around crying and stuff. You know that there's people that have lost family members, and I think that was definitely the saddest thing I've ever saw, or the worst thing I ever saw.
What was your reaction when you finally came home?
I was lucky enough to come home twice. The first time, if you stay in the war zone for a year, they allow you to come back for 2 weeks, which was kind of nice. And I was actually be able to come for Christmas. It was nice because Emmeline was only, she was young. I don't even know how old she was, maybe 2 years old. And the neatest thing was she spoke late, but I hadn't spent a lot of time with her because she was super small. Sorry, but I remember I was playing with her, and she started crawling into the other room, and she wanted to play, and she came and she looked at me and she went like this, which was our sign, baby sign for more. So she wanted me to come in and play with her, and I thought that was awesome. That she, I didn't spend any time with her, and we were together for 2 days, and she wanted me to continue playing with her. I thought that was great. Not to mention the hugs I got at the airport. I remember we flew into Dallas, and there was these just awesome ladies. They must have all been in their 60s and 70s, just standing there at the bottom of the escalator from where we all debarked down the escalator, and they walked up to every single person getting off the escalator and gave them a big hug. I thought it was super sweet.
Did you get much sleep when you were away?
In Iraq, I think I got okay sleep. We worked 7 days a week, and we got a half day off a week and 1 week off a month, or 1 day off a month. I'm sorry. Sleep wasn't bad then. On the ship, I didn't get very much sleep most of the time. When I did the deployment, when I went on a deployment. On one ship, I was 6 on, 6 off. So you're actually physically on watch in the engineering plant for 6 hours. Then you have 6 hours off. And in that 6 hours, you have to figure out how to do all the stuff you need to do as your job, plus eat, plus work out if you want to work out, and then find some time to sleep. So that was a little tough. But you'd be amazed what you get used to.
Did you keep a journal of your experiences?
I did not. And I wasn't a great letter writer either, which is good that we had email finally came up, because I was able to sit down. The world revolves around email now, even the military. So sitting down and doing work, it was very easy just to stop what you were doing and spend 5 minutes stuff. Yeah, I'm trying to think if I ever did it. I've never done a journal.
How would you describe yourself as a person when you were there?
I guess professional and dedicated. It was very interesting because I was Navy and they were Army, and it surprisingly enough, we do a lot of things differently. I just wanted to get there and do my job and get out of there as soon as possible. I know that I'm a little intense at times when it comes to my job, and I did get not in trouble, but I did get chastised by someone at one point for being too intense about things. But I think I was fine there. I was, like I said, dedicated, professional. I was intense. I did my job. I tried to take care of my folks and the people I was working with.
Okay, now Frankie's going to ask some questions.
Okay. How would you describe yourself as a person? Did you write to your family?
Yes. Like I said, I think I did a lot more. When I first started boot camp, it was kind of nice because they gave you like a little stationery set, and I wrote in boot camp a lot because it's such a different way of life that really your only connection to like kind of calm you down is to write a letter to your mom or your brother or your sister or your girlfriend or whoever you have at the time. As I started going into the ships and getting a little bit more used to everything and older, I really wasn't good at keeping in touch writing wise, but email, I did a lot of emailing. At least it was just a hi or a sentence or something.
How often did they move you from place to place?
I moved quite a bit. I would say in the 27 years, probably about 12 times maybe. At least 12 times. I mean, some of that was for training and such, but most of my training was long enough that they actually physically moved us. I know in the last, from Iraq on, we were in Japan. Emmy was born in Japan. We moved from Japan to Norfolk. I got moved to Iraq, and they moved Raina to Cape Cod or to Newport. Then I went to Newport, and we moved to Cape Cod. So that's six times in 7 years. 6 years.
What was your role in the war?
So what happened when they went over to Iraq is they basically had more jobs than they had people, and the Army was on. Normally, the big picture, the ships come in, the Marines are on the ships. The Marines go and they take the beach. They set up the beach. They can bring more stuff on, and they allow the Army to go into the center of the universe and start taking over things. So the Army has a huge job to control basically all of Iraq. But it was a multinational force, so there was the Koreans were there, and the British were there, and the Australians were there, and the Croatians. We had some people from Tonga, which was amazing. But even with all that UN support, we were unable to do all the jobs that we had to do. So they did this thing called individual augmentee, and they would find a job that needed to be done, and they would put a message out to all the branches of the government, with the exception of all the military branches, with the exception of the Army, and say, I need this job done, can you fill it? I was originally picked out of a group of people to be a force protection officer, which means I was going to travel around Iraq to the different camps and bases and FOBs and assess their force protection and make sure if they had to do better things to make themselves safe. By the time I got there, that job was no longer needed. So I worked at this place called the Iraq Assistance Group, which was in charge of the Army guys who went to the Iraqi Army guys and taught them how to be an Army again, because we disbanded the Iraqi Army when we took over Iraq. So they had to build it up from scratch.
Did you ever lose a friend?
There was a couple of people in IAG, the Iraq Assistance Group, that were killed in action. They were not like friends of mine, but they were acquaintances, and I knew them, and I had worked with them. Lucky nobody very close to me.
Are you still connected to anybody you were in war with?
Yeah, there's several people. As a matter of fact, I just spoke with my previous boss from my last ship before I retired. His name's Tim. He's still in the Navy, hasn't retired yet, but his wife had been sick, and I was checking in on her. But we occasionally go back and forth and chat, and certain things. There's a website, I'm gonna forget the name of it. Together We Served, TWS, and it's like it's almost like if you're with LinkedIn, or I guess it's like Facebook too, but it's basically LinkedIn for military, and you can put all your different places that you were, and people can connect to you and pass messages on it. But I don't go on that anymore, but LinkedIn, occasionally I have people, I'm connected with people that I was stationed with.
How did you cope with the things you saw?
I think a lot of it is just, unfortunately, getting used to it. It's not difficult to get used to things when it's happening. It's difficult to get used to things when you're home. And again, luckily, I was not in the same position that some of the other Army folks were, or some of the Special Force Navy guys. I never had to worry about some of the things that they have to do, and I was never directly in a firefight. I never actually had to kill anyone. I never got to see anybody in front of me get killed. So some of the really overwhelming, the post-traumatic stress kind of inducing things, I never really had to deal with. But I did deal with some of the stresses that I dealt with, where we did have mortars and rockets launched into our base, and I did leave the base a lot and travel with IAG out and around, and it's a little stressful. But I think I dealt with it. I just you kind of think about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and you try to be as safe as possible and do the right thing. Raise your hand if you think something is wrong, and try to figure it out. And then when you get home, you have to leave some things behind you, and work on now transitioning into being a military person in a civilian world as opposed to a military person in the military world. And luckily it wasn't difficult for me to do that, and now that I've retired, it's even better now being a prior military person in the civilian world. I think that's even more difficult. But.
Did the war have an effect on your mental health?
I've had some anxieties that I've been dealing with that I didn't have prior to my service in Iraq. Nothing, luckily, has been debilitating where it affected my ability to get a job or maintain a relationship with family. I haven't had to worry about any alcohol or drug dependence or anything like that, which is something that's very, very common with people that have post-traumatic stress or anxieties caused by war. So I've been very lucky.
Were you mentally or physically drained, or both?
Upon return, I have to admit, I don't think I realized how hard we were going all the time. And I know that I didn't have, like I said, I wasn't running around with a rifle in my hand, but we went hard, working for a year, 7 days a week. It takes a toll on you. And I don't think I got it until they do this thing called Warrior Transition, where they send, I forgot where they sent us, I think it was Kuwait, and they will not send you home. You have to stay at this place for like a set amount of days, and you have to do nothing. And we didn't do anything, and I think I walked around in shorts and a t-shirt for the first time, and I turned in, the most relieving thing for me that kind of let me take a deep breath, we used to wear body armor, and I was able to take my body armor and turn it in. And so I knew I'd never have to wear it again. And another thing that was kind of nice is, besides the fact that you could just read a book and sleep and go eat, Pizza Hut for the first time in ages and ages. I don't think it was Pizza Hut. What did I have? Subway. I think I had Subway. But that's when I realized how tired I was. And they do a really good job, because Robert Williams and Lance Armstrong, and you look back on it, Rob Williams no longer with us, and Lance Armstrong is no longer a big hero. But there was somewhat like 5 or 6 people came with the USO and were doing shows for us and stuff and trying to get us going. But again, long answer to a very short question. I'll stop there.
What was your first day like?
Back home or there?
Either.
So the first day in Iraq was, that's a tough one. So they fly us in this big plane. I think I remember the first thing is they fly you into Kuwait first before you go into country. And I remember the smell. I didn't like the smell. I remember getting off the plane. It just smells really weird there, and the air is like brown and very. And then it's like it's humid, but it's hot, and it's just a really, I can't explain it to you how it just I hated the smell. And we went to the middle of the desert into a classroom where we had to go and do improvised explosive device training. And it was an interesting place because we slept, ate, trained in the same place. So we would go to school all day, then we would go out and do all this training in the Humvees and check for IDs, then we'd come home and push all our stuff to the wall and sleep on the floor, eating MREs. So it was a huge change for me. One thing about the Navy is that we eat pretty good on the ships. So the Army guys love coming to the ships, so it's nice.
Would you recommend going into the military?
Oh, absolutely. If that's something that you're interested in, and you don't make the same mistakes I did, and you take a deep breath and you think about why you're going, and I although I had times away from my family, I was able to get a graduate degree from MIT and an undergraduate degree from the University of North Florida, and I've been to probably 15 different countries and met tons of different people, and just the experiences I have with management of people and the people I met. There's a lot of positive things to think about. But if you go in it with open eyes and an open mind, and find a job that you really want to do, and realize that it's an honor to serve, then sure, I highly recommend it. As long as you make the decision for the right reasons. I think I'm going to quote it wrong. I think it's only 1% of the population of the United States volunteers for the service. So hopefully those are all the right people.
Did you ever think that you wouldn't come home?
I have to admit that I'm sure that went through my head. I can't remember a particular instance. I think that I remember when we were talking about the worst thing I saw with the ID. There were times when I was out in the convoys in Iraq that it did probably enter my head that something could happen at any time. And you hear about what happens to these other kids and some adults too, that I say kids because they're much younger than me, these 18-year-old Army guys who get these IDs and they unfortunately lose limbs and arms, and so that went through my head because you never knew it was coming. So it was interesting. I think the other one was we were going to a place called Samarra in northern Iraq, and there's one of the oldest, it could be the oldest or one of the oldest mosque minarets in the world, and they were very concerned about it getting blown up by insurgency. And I remember we flew a helicopter up there. I was in my Navy brown, and all the Army guys were in green, and we were walking in a big gaggle from where we landed the helicopter to our meeting, and it was surrounded by all these green and me in brown. And so I remember it going through my head that if someone was on a rooftop looking down at us, they would see all these people in green and the one person in brown, and if I was going to kill somebody, who would I kill? It's got to be that guy in the brown, because he must be important. I wasn't, I could have yelled out, "I'm not important, don't shoot me." But I remember that going through my head. That was a weird feeling. I didn't wear brown after that, by the way. I wore an Army uniform and started wearing Army stuff. So.
What was your specific role?
In Iraq or generally?
Generally.
So generally, I was a surface warfare officer of the Navy. We don't have any television shows about my job, so nobody knows what we do. But surface warfare officers are the people who command ships and drive. They're the COs, the commanding officers, and the executive officers of ships. So me personally, I was mostly propulsion, so I did a lot of engineering work. So I'm an engineer by trade.
What was going through your head when you were first shot at?
I guess I didn't actually have a bullet actually flying towards me that I know of. I did hear multiple times. We heard gunfire and 50 cals and rockets and mortars and such. I remember the one thing that what they talked about with mortars is if you can hear them, they're not going to hit you. So how you see a show and they're like, they talk about the mortar sound. If you hear that noise, it's not going to hit you. It's not going towards you. It's if you don't hear it, that's when you have to be scared. That's not. I'm not saying it's not going to hit over there and explode and hit you with rocks and things. I think that when that kind of thing happened, there was times when I was on my own walking, who knows where, and you'd hear like incoming. They had an alarm that went off for incoming rockets and mortars, and I would just be like, holy crap, and run. And they had these like little bunkers you could hide in. I do remember one time, and I don't want to get TMI, but I was going to the bathroom once, and the rocket alarm went off. And I was like, oh my god, I don't want to die in a bathroom, you know. So.
Did you ever like witness death?
With the exception of the IED, the IED attack that I saw when we passed that after it happened, I did see some people get hurt on ships. I've never seen anybody get killed, thank goodness.
Were you satisfied by the time you spent away and what you did?
Yeah, I have to admit, I mean, when I went to specifically Iraq, I've had a lot of, satisfying moments, and a lot of times when I'm being like, what the heck are we doing out here? But for Iraq particularly, when I got there, it was just after the surge, so they had just surged a whole bunch of troops to Iraq, and Iraq was very, very dangerous. And every morning they'd had this meeting where all the higher-ups would do all their talking and talk about casualties and stuff like that. And it was very satisfying to see how dangerous and crazy things were when I first got there. And then a year later, the progress that had happened with the Iraqi army and the Iraqi National Police, and the minimize of casualties both on the Iraqi and the U.S. side. And I was very, very satisfied about what I did. I'm very proud of what I did in Iraq. Yeah.
Did you get much sleep when you were
One more time, I'm sorry.
Did you get much sleep when you were away?
On the ships, no. It's very disparate. As a matter of fact, they're doing a lot of studies right now about the lack of sleep, that how it affects sailors. And unfortunately, there's been 2 ships that collided with other ships in the last, I think, year, both in Japan and the Pacific, and they've directly attributed that to lack of sleep. In Iraq, you got as much sleep as you just got as much sleep as you possibly could. No naps or anything, unfortunately.
Okay.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, cool. Did we go over?
I don't know if we went over or not. Let's see. I don't know.
I'm a talker.
Oh, 32. 32. That's like